Good morning. Welcome to the Foster Swift Sports Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dave Russell. I'm joined with my two co-hosts, Charlie Sarche and Tony Delamonte. Today, we're pleased to be joined by Coach Dan Roushar. Dan is a football coach with over 40 years of experience at both the collegiate and the professional levels. He's currently the offensive line coach for the Chicago Bears, started there in the 2025 season. Prior to that, he was the offensive line coach at Tulane University. Before his time at Tulane, he spent 10 seasons on the coaching staff with the New Orleans Saints. And before that, he had a number of collegiate stops at Michigan State, Northern Illinois, University of Illinois, Ball State, Rhode Island, and Butler University. Dan was a 2-year letterman at quarterback at Northern Illinois. Coach, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dave. Guys, it's good to be with you.
Absolutely.
So, first of all, we want to ask you about this great season the Chicago Bears had. You know, in my opinion, you're the best offensive line coach in the country, and I mean that. I'm not just saying that because you agreed to come on our podcast. But, I mean, I think the improvement that we saw in the Chicago Bears line from before you were there till this last year has just been remarkable. So what went into that success?
Well, there's a lot of things that go into it, Dave, and thank you for the compliment. I had just finished at Tulane, and you're kind of on the back end of what you feel like is your career, and I had been contacted by Dan Campbell, who I'd worked with in New Orleans, and Dan's obviously the head coach of the Lions, and Dan just sent a text and he said, "Hey, would you ever be interested in getting back in?" He knew that I had stepped away, and I said, with the right person in the right setting, I'd be very interested. And the season ends with Detroit. Sadly for them, probably shorter than they wanted it, But Ben then becomes the head coach of the Chicago Bears, and he's going through and he's putting together his staff. And we had talked a couple of times by phone, and then I came up here for the interview. And I've worked with a lot of great coaches. You go back to Mark D'Antonio and a number of other guys that I don't need to get into at this time. But you've been around really good people, and it's easy to see it when you come in on an interview process. And I felt Ben was unique in the sense that he's driven as a play caller. He's an offensive-minded guy. But he's one of the few guys that I felt like really understood offensive line play. That excited me when we started talking about the potential of putting this thing together. In the conclusion of the interview, I'm sitting with him, and he said, "Have you watched any of the Chicago Bear film previous to the year?" And I said, "I have not." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, honestly, it really doesn't matter at this moment, in my opinion. I think an evaluation needs to be made rather than a judgment." So he said, "Well, I'm going to tell you right now, we, from Ryan Poles and myself down, we're committed to making the room better." And very quickly, you take the job. There's a lot of things that go into it. You evaluate your current roster, but then you quickly move into what are potential free agents, guys that are going to be coming on the market. Maybe you have the ability to do something with them, maybe you don't. So you go through the evaluation, you watch these players, you do the best you can to rank them and see if they'd be in your wheelhouse as a fit. Well, we had a number of guys, I think myself and Kyle DeVan, who works closely with me, I think we had done close to 30 players, and we really saw a need to go get 3 players to make ourselves better. And as it turned out, we go and get Jonah Jackson from the Los Angeles Rams that had been on a high-end contract and maybe had a disappointing year for him, but Ben had history with him in Detroit. I had evaluated him coming out of college. He had played at Rutgers and then at Ohio State, and I was very familiar with him. And then, you go through that process, and then we were targeting another player in Kansas City. Trey Smith was a high-value sign. out there. We knew the market was going to be high for him, and Kansas City re-signs him. And right away, you realize that they may not be able to keep additional players. Well, it just worked out where Joe Tooney somehow, some way was available in a trade scenario for us. And so we solidified 2 guard positions, and then we signed Drew Dahlman, who had played in Atlanta, and thought he would fit what we were looking for in the center position. Smart, steady, had really good quickness, initial quickness, had really good lateral range. And so we saw these traits, and we were fortunate enough to put the 3 together. Coupled with the fact that Ryan Poles had drafted Darnell Wright, our right tackle, as the number 10 pick 3 years ago. So right away, you've just improved the talent room in the room dramatically. I think one of the things that was probably the most pressing was to try to bring chemistry and togetherness. And as the year went on, and we can talk further about the season, but I just can speak for those guys in that room. They are the ultimate pros, and when I say that, the way they conduct themselves from the moment they enter the building to when they leave, they are outstanding models for everybody. They see how people see how they take care of the body, how engaged they are, how smart they are, how the type of work ethic they have. And so I really felt like they became a very close group, maybe the closest group I'd ever been part of. And we had some really good offensive lines in New Orleans when I was there, talented. These guys maybe even were a little bit more together than I'd been part of. So that began the turnaround. As we targeted the spring and we were, maybe driving the message, I think we felt like if we were going to have success in Chicago, it was going to be because of our guys up front. And that's probably true in every organization. But the guys came together. We didn't start real well, but you saw steady improvement. You saw commitment, and then the results became the results. So it was a heck of a year. The way we won was unlike anything I'd been a part of, because you have those moments, whether you're at Michigan State, the University of Cincinnati, the University of Illinois, wherever. You have those moments, but we had a number of them that the guys certainly liked the result, but I think a lot of confidence started to build within the organization, and a belief in, hey, how the coaches were coaching it, the things that were important to winning, and then those things translated into us actually winning games. And when those things come together and the belief becomes what it was, we were a tough out.
And how did you instill that confidence, either on the player side or the coaching side? You mentioned a number of comebacks this year, and it felt like that last play in regulation against the Rams that, you guys could do no wrong. And, I mean, that was one of the most unbelievable plays I've ever seen. What sort of gave you guys that confidence that no matter the score, you're never out of it?
Well, I think to me, confidence is demonstrated ability. It's something that's happened before. And in our case, we had a number of games that came down to the last possession. And whether it was our special teams or our defense or us on offense executing at a point that changed the outcome of the game, those things happened, and so the guys never believed they were out of it. And we have a young, dynamic quarterback that can make a lot of things happen, has tremendous arm talent, has incredible escapability. You don't always know exactly what he's going to do, and that's good and bad. But when you really kind of look at the last, 4 or 5 games, maybe even aside from Detroit, although that came down to a field goal, it seemed like he had the ball in his possession to impact how the game was going to finish. And he was able to do that at a high level. And, it's hard to actually articulate, but you just knew in some scenarios, even the last Green Bay playoff game, where we're down several scores going in at halftime, and things hadn't gone exactly the way we had planned it. They're playing well. We maybe aren't playing as well as we'd like, and yet at halftime you go back out there and you're like, hey, we're a possession away from being right back in this, and he was able to do that. He's a unique talent that way.
Yeah, Dan, I think we're all Lions fans here, but obviously we're really happy for you and the success that you've had over there. It's been very impressive to watch. But I'm just curious, how much influence do you have on the decision to go and get players, like you were mentioning, the free agents? Like, how much influence do you have on going to get those college guys or the free agents? Are you working closely with your GM and your head coach to go and get who you want?
Yeah, well, listen, I think there's a lot of collaboration from top down. Ryan, as a general manager, is evaluating talent. He works closely with the people that handle the salary cap and how all those things are worked out. And then Ben and myself, and in our case, Kyle Devan, who works with me, we're all collaborating. We do independent work. We form independent opinions, and yet when we come together and we start talking, you want to be able to describe the player very visually for Ryan or Ben to say, man, I understand exactly what you see in his strengths, or maybe the deficiencies, or what we think we can make better right now that's not as good as you want it to be. And oftentimes you're on the money and sometimes you miss, but in this case we were very fortunate. We got one really proven player. We get one player that Ben had a relationship with and saw what that looked like. So it's a collaboration. No one person is making that decision. Ultimately, the decision maker is Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson. We do our best to do all the legwork, and you call other coaches that have been around these guys. Hey, what are they like in the locker room? Are they good people? How do they carry themselves away from the game? Those kind. You're doing as much homework as you can, and it's not a lot different than college football in that evaluation.
Yeah, that's kind of my follow-up to that question, Dan. How does your process at the NFL level kind of mirror how the current NCAA transfer portal shakes out? I mean, I'm sure you saw a little bit of it when you were coaching at the college level, and now it's an entirely different game with the introduction of NIL. How does that process at the league level translate over to the process at the college level now?
Well, there's so many layers that go into all of it. I would say when I left Michigan State in 2012, leading into the 13 season to go to the National Football League, I can vividly remember back then we were doing camps had become evaluations where high school players would come to you and you'd look at them as potential prospects. And I remember we were walking to the locker room, and I was trailing within earshot of Coach Antonio and Coach Izzo talking, and Coach Izzo turned to whoever we were walking as a group with and said, your game is becoming more like basketball. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, the AAU game had become so prevalent in college basketball with agents and representation, and sure enough, here we are years later, and that seems to be the climate in college football. I would say for me as a coach, whether it was 1986 and I was at Butler University and growing in the industry, you learn to begin the evaluation of a player relative to your level. Oftentimes we're looking at players and seeing what they can't do. That's generally very obvious. I think you have to spend a lot of time and start looking at what they can do. What are they capable of? Does this guy have movement traits, light in the frame? Can he get big? On and on and on. We could talk about it for hours. But those experiences you draw on for 40 years, and then you come to the, whatever it was, 32, 33 years in the coaching profession before I broke into the National Football League, and you start coming in, you're looking at the 1% of the 1%. But oftentimes there's players that are sitting in the 5th or the 6th or the 7th round, and you're seeing traits of these players that are like, no, that translates to success. Now, how does that fit into our system? And can we get these guys to play at the level that we want them to play at? Are they willing to have the work ethic and the toughness, all the things that are required to thrive? And that to me is the trick. And unless you really get to know the kid, and that oftentimes takes more than just simply a meeting. But I think if you do enough legwork, you will eventually find out exactly what you're bringing into your locker room. Coach D'Antonio did it at Michigan State. He did it with us when we were at Cincinnati. And all the mentors, whether it was Nick or Jim Tressel, where we all came from these trees, or in my case, playing for a guy like Bill Mallory, those things were really, really important. And those were instilled into me as a young coach, that there's talent and then there's what wins with talent. And there's two different things there.
And Coach, obviously, or at least from my perspective, your evaluation ability is off the charts. You've had success everywhere you've gone. And before we started recording, you talked about going to the NFL Combine this week, where obviously you'll be doing some evaluations. Can you talk about what that looks like?
So, like in our case, specifically to the offensive line, I'm gonna meet with about 10 players in a formal setting. So, Dave, these interview times have already been set by the club. The other 31 teams are trying to meet with the same players. We're all shopping the same aisle, if you will. And we'll get about a 15-minute segment with each player. They'll come in. You have the head coach, GM, in our case, chairman of the Chicago Bears, the president. There's a lot of people in the room. In our case, I just simply get in, and for us, because our scouts have been into the respective colleges where these kids are coming from, you feel like there's been a lot of background work done. Hey, from off the field issues to on the field issues to health, nutrition, work ethic in the weight room, relationships with people in the building, outside the building. There's been a lot of things that have already been reported. So in our short meeting, it's all about football. And the one thing that we want to get out of it is, what's the knowledge of the player coming in? Does he really have a good foundation to learn? And every university is a little bit different, or college setting's a little bit different, in the sense that some guys are coached at a really high level, some guys maybe not as high level. Maybe we've had multiple transfers from college to college to college, and things are maybe just a little bit off. What's in there? So in that 15 minutes, you're trying to really hone in on, in a short interview, hey, what's this guy's football IQ like? That's really what you're driving at. And speaking on last year, because we were in the market, we thought we were in the market to go early. We had the 10th pick, and although that went to Colston, which was a heck of a pick, we're all doing that as positions, coaches. That's really what we're driving at for our head football coach, our GM, and those in the room, to be able to go, man, this guy's got good football makeup, or there's some real concerns. And the more concerns there are, the less clean they are, the more work you then have to do after the process. That's bringing them to campus for what we call 30 visits. You get 30 prospects to come to campus and you can spend an entire day, meal setting, whatever those things are, to do more legwork. And then a process like this where you're on Zoom, hey, how much more can we gather? And I always like to, in the process, I always like to go back to if I know somebody that I really know at a college that's worked with the player, and they can give me insider information about what this like how's this guy handle injury? Is he going to be able to fight through it, or are we going to be dealing with a guy that's in the clubhouse? Because availability is so important in this game.
Coach, we do some college and high school sort of NIL and rev share representation, and I was recently asked by a parent, how does the NFL view players sort of changing teams more often than it seems like they ever have? And does that play a factor into your analysis at all? I have to imagine 20 years ago, if a guy, was on 4 teams in 4 years, you'd probably look at that a certain way. But is that the case now?
Yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle that you factor in. When there's change, why is there change? Were you maybe undervalued in the recruiting process? Or were you behind a player that you weren't going to be able to beat out? The coach was maybe a little bit more demanding here, or I could go get more money here. Well, yeah, all those things count. Obviously, the first thing we're going to do in the evaluation is we're going to get in its entirety all of their college film, wherever they played at. And that's in a system that you start doing your legwork, and the first thing you're going to look at is, hey, how's the guy play? Is he capable? Does he have the traits we're looking for? Does he fit what the Chicago Bears are looking for, what Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles want? If there's questions, and I think there always are questions, when you start to then factor in, for me personally, the NIL or the guy that transfers a number of times, I view that with a lot of concern.
Coach, how important would you say when you're doing these evaluations is level of play? Like when you're going to think about drafting a guy who maybe played at a group of 5 school or even a D2 school, like Ferris State maybe, compared to a guy that's played at a Power 4. How important is that experience at the Power 4 level?
Well, you want them to be competing at the very highest level, but if a guy can play, it doesn't matter where he's at. And with today's information age and the access we have to video and so on and so forth, if there's a player out there, he's being looked at. Now, let's just say that, Indiana had arguably the best football team in the country this year. And they go on to win the national championship. And you're looking at a really good defensive front. You're looking at really good offensive linemen. And you're like, okay, these kids are playing against each other every day, which improves their level of play. And then you get to see the actual product on game day. Well, you see that as a positive. You get a Division II talent, and you recognize that he's going to play against 2, maybe 3 players that are close to NFL type talent in their time at a respective school. And I coached at Division II level, so it's not like I'm speaking out of turn here. But what I'm saying is, I guess, is if a guy can play, you're going to evaluate that player. You are going to think, okay, what's this guy going to look like if he were playing at Ohio State every week? What's that look like? But at the end of the day, that might move a guy a notch lower in the draft process. Maybe it doesn't. But at the end of the day, that guy will make an NFL team if he's good enough. It will not be determined by the fact that he went to Butler University.
Coach, what advice would you have for, high-level athletes out there, that are starting that recruiting process?
Well, having done this long enough, Dave, I would say if from the parent to the player, listen to what the recruiting process or picture is. For example, what kind of culture is going to be in the locker room next to me? Are they going purely out and selecting what appears to be the most talented potential, or are we going out and getting not only talented players, but guys that you want to be in the locker room with, that you'll go to class with, that you'll develop relationships with? What's that coaching staff currently look like from top down? What's the medical situation like in regards to from the head trainer to the assistant trainers? How are we treating and getting players back on the field, to what the dining room looks like from a nutrition standpoint? And maybe as important as anything is, what's that weight room look like? The leadership in there, what's going to be driven to enhance my abilities as an athlete to grow to what I think is my maximum ability. All that said, I think one of the things that's happening more and more is kids are specializing in sport, and I understand the tug and the pull that way. But when I look around the National Football League and I talk to our players, hey, what'd you play in high school? Multiple sport athletes throughout. They liked competing. They liked getting away from the game. Our receiver coach is Antoine Randall L. You guys are all familiar with him, was with the Lions as a coach. But, he was a four-sport athlete at Indiana. He played basketball for Bobby Knight, football. He was a three-sport athlete in college and played baseball to a high level. I just think that's the world where your very best thrive, and they eventually become what you want them to be. In the 9 seasons, that really 9.5 that I was around Drew Brees, you forget how good he was at everything, just aside from football. So when I was a college coach and I would go in and the high school coach would say, well, I don't want him playing basketball, or I don't want him wrestling. And I would be like, I don't agree with that. I love, as an offensive line coach, I loved finding wrestlers. And if they're not wrestlers, I want them either they're doing something in the track and field, or they're doing something with basketball. I just think you get a more well-rounded, higher competitive kid.
I know one of our guys we represent was a hockey player in high school.
There you go.
I think that's got to translate well.
Heck yeah. I mean, you're talking about speed, balance, power, agility, hand-eye coordination. My gosh, all the things you look for.
Coach, I had sort of an offensive line coaching question. When you have a guy like Caleb with escapability, like you mentioned, do you have to coach your guys in a certain way to sort of make sure that they are disciplined and, still engaged throughout a 15-second play, because those do happen?
Yeah, I would say that, when you are protecting Drew Brees, there's a clock in our head, and it's just developed. You don't like it as a coach, but they anticipate the ball being out, and where he throws the ball from that launch point, it's coming out from there, and they know they're protecting it for 2.3 to 3.3 seconds. In the case of Caleb, you don't know how he's going to extend the play, where he's going to extend the play. You don't know why he's going to move right or he's going to move left. but you know that oftentimes there's going to be movement. So you're really trying to coach the guys to stay connected, sustain, and the element of finish has to be when you feel the rush angle change to where he's now the defender's in a pursuit mode. That's true. You referenced earlier the last throw against the Rams that Caleb makes. Well, he just continues backing up, and at that point, the pocket is built from inside out. You want to be firm inside. You tackles control the width. You allow the QB to step forward. He just kept backing up, and everything about at that moment in design of the protection is broken down because of where he's gone. And yet you're looking at it, and then the end result's a touchdown, and it's like the coach on the sideline that says don't, and then good.
No, yes.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so the challenge is to protect those spots, but the other part of a guy like that is oftentimes he makes you look a heck of a lot better than you really are.
Sure. Coach, how would you describe your coaching style? So say a guy's not having his best day, maybe needs to get taken out. How would you say, you react to a situation like that? Do you get, that Tom Izzo level energy, or are you more, sit him down, calm him down, and try to just get him refocused?
Well, I think you have to know your players, and you're going to treat them all a little bit different. Some guys need, at times, to be challenged with a kick in the tail, and some guys need positive reinforcement and encouragement, and guys, when they start to this is a service-driven industry, and to serve them is to know them well enough to see how they function daily. When you get on them in the classroom, what that day look like. Yeah, he didn't respond very well. Oh man, he did respond well. Those things all are banked, and it's part of the resource in what you do. And we had a young man last year that we had drafted that had really not played much left tackle. That was the vision. Let's move him to left tackle. And he went there, and there was moments of good. There were a lot of moments of uncertainty and hesitancy, and just didn't look like the same player. And at some point we made the decision to move him back to the right side just to make him more comfortable, get back to the basics and understanding he can play. And there's so many things that go through their minds, mentally, just to begin the process of then physically doing the job and the demands with it. So it was one of those cases where you looked at, and in your best judgment, you think, man, let's take him back over there, let's get his feet back underneath him, let's start having the ability to stack a good day after a good day, bring some consistency to it. And then ultimately he ends up at some point moving back to left tackle and starts the year for us, or starts at the back end of the year for us, and does a pretty good job. Those are all experiences, and just looking at it, there's days where you get, it's like I tell the guys, you want to make us change our demeanor with you, it's going to be lack of effort, lack of toughness. I do not view mistakes as issues unless they reoccur. So we make a mistake day one, this should not be day two or day three. That's an indictment on us as teachers. It's an indictment on you as a learner. When those things happen, then you have to change that behavior. The one thing about the National Football League is it's so competitive. You're dealing with the 1% of the 1% of the world, and they realize, we're going to start training camp. We're going to have 15 or 16 offensive linemen in there. We're going to keep 8 on the roster, and the other number will, between another 2 to 3 or 4 will be on practice squad, depending on their capability and ability. And you want all of them to make it. You're doing everything in your power to help them. And that's what makes it so enjoyable. And so when you go through all of those different scenarios with it, they have to be highly motivated. They understand when they walk in the building, man, I may not make it out of this day and still have a job. And I feel for that.
Dan, you've worked with a lot of legendary coaches in your career. Who has had the most impact on your coaching career?
That's a great question, Dave. My father was a high school coach that you grow up with, and I watched him deal with people at a very high level, and I watched that and learned that and grew up with that. And then I played for Bill Mallory, who is, in my mind, he's a Hall of Fame coach. My high school coach was a great high school quarterback coach. His name's Dick Olin. He left the state of Iowa. He ended up down in Texas, and he's had, I don't know how many guys go on to be elite college players, names that we would recognize and or into the NFL. And then when I got my first opportunity to go back to college football, I was with a guy by the name of Bill Lynch. And Bill had a profound effect on me, gave me my first job. But Bill ascended to being the head coach at the University of Indiana. I worked for him at Butler. He put me on the right path a number of times when I was driving in different directions. He also very quickly, as a young coach, you can form impressions of players and other coaches for what they may or may not do, and really the smart ones are really watching, well, how do their guys play, or how does this kid compete, or whatever. So those two guys really did something for me as a young coach. And then I ended up with a guy, Ron Turner at the University of Illinois was outstanding. I wanted to learn the West Coast system. I was around him. Then I ended up with a guy by the name of Joe Novak, who I believe is in the College Football Hall of Fame. I'm not even sure on that. But Joe had taken over Northern Illinois, my alma mater. We had won the Mid-American Conferences when I was a player. I saw how Coach built that. I GA'd for Lee Corso. So, it's just so many things that you pass through and the assistants that come with that. But with Joe, people don't know this, but I was part of a team. We were rebuilding, and we lost 17 straight games in my time there. You don't get to do that today. But we had a phenomenal coaching staff. Pat Narduzzi was there, myself. Scott Schaefer ended up being a head coach at Syracuse for a period of time. Mike Mallory was on that staff, Bill's son. All these guys coach in the NFL, coach college, whatever. But in that time, I recognized there was a level of patience. At the same time, it created urgency, a toughness that went with. And eventually that program not only became really good, but sustained that success for 10 years. Well, then I had an opportunity to work with Coach D'Antonio for 8 years, and remarkable human being, phenomenal football coach, but a better person than coach. And he's a heck of a football coach. So, and then I get a chance to work with Sean Payton, who I had worked with as an assistant at the University of Illinois many years ago under Lou Tepper. And we had a relationship. So, even at Tulane, I was there for a season. I went there with Willie Fritz, who's the head coach at the University of Houston. And Willie's had hit one everywhere he's gone. And I didn't really want to do that, but I didn't want to move at that time. My son was in high school, and, I wanted to see his last year. And, there were factors. Anyhow, I stayed, I coached there. And then John Summerall, who's now the head coach of Florida, he came in and he asked me to stay for a year. And, and then there's so many assistant coaches and others that have shared with me that have impacted me. And I would be I can remember, I don't have a great relationship with Coach Izzo. But while I was there, I went and watched his basketball practices, and I learned a lot from those really good teachers. So they've all had something to do with my successes. I didn't name a couple others that I could, but I've been really fortunate. And this Ben Johnson is something. He's special.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you've had an incredible career. And last question from me, as Tony mentioned a little bit earlier, we've been representing a few players, and we've got a couple offensive linemen that we represent that are in their red shirt freshman, red shirt sophomore year. What advice would you have to guys like that are kind of early on in their college career to make the best of their time in college and eventually catch your eye at the NFL level?
Well, I like our guys. I think there's a relentless pursuit of excellence. What they choose to do with their day, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, are they working to become the best possible player and person that they can be? That's not easy to do. You're talking about a highly disciplined, a young man with phenomenal vision that has a belief in himself. And I would encourage him to think about football when he goes to bed, think about football when he gets up. And when I say that, to have a precise plan. What's my day look like? How do I get better? What can I do to control that? Because there's going to be the required actions from the strength coach, his position coach, so on and so forth. Well, that's the bare minimum. What are we talking about in addition to that? How do I get better? Because the competition is such. I would ask the young player to have patience, but man, the urgency has to be there. Guys think, well, hey, I've been redshirted, and you know what? When my time comes, I'm going to be ready. No, your time is now. Get yourself ready now. I personally love guys that are incredibly competitive. I think there's a mental and a physical toughness that goes to success in our game. I think that guys that can improve those levels, and I think those are things that are experienced but challenged every day. So there's going to be a lot of days where we have setbacks. We go backwards. There's some adversity that we deal with. Whatever those things are, there's growth in that, and those are good things. That's part of the process.
Right. Coach, how do you build on the success you guys had last season? Hopefully not too much success next season as Lions fans, but, what are you looking for next year?
In the NFL, there's probably about, 40% of your roster turns over every year. So there's a high level of turnover, and to get it right again will be a real challenge. We feel like we have some really strong pieces to build on, and yet in our division, we know Detroit's going to be better. We know Minnesota's going to be better, and we know Green Bay's going to be better. So, we have to find the right 53 on the roster. We have to put the other pieces in place that can supplement the 53 in the event of an injury or things that happen. It's a remarkable challenge. We'll have to improve some positions across the board, but you're always trying to do that. You're trying to get younger, better players that are more affordable. That's the trick in this thing, and obviously Seattle has wired it this year, and we tasted some success this year. It'll be interesting to see how the guys come back. And April, what I believe is 21st, is when they begin the voluntary off-season program here, and we'll get an idea of how they feel about their commitment right away.
Well, Dan, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. And while we may be Lions fans at the table, you have three Dan Roushar fans here and that will be rooting for you and following you. And thanks again. And hopefully you'll come back again.
You bet. You guys have a great day. And I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but the time that we spent in East Lansing was arguably as quality growth of our family, the friendships that we developed, and then being part of that special university. From the top down, it was just a real joy to be part of, and it's a big part of our family and who we are.
Yeah, and I want to add to that too. We were neighbors when you were in East Lansing, and both my daughters. My older daughter played lacrosse at Kent State, and Abby's going to play lacrosse at Pitt next year. And it was actually, I believe, Mallory that introduced Reagan to lacrosse to begin with. So that's I was thinking about that today. That's so ironic.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, well, listen, appreciate you guys, and if I can do anything, holler. Hopefully you weren't bored.
No, we really appreciate it. Thanks, Coach.
All right, guys.
Thanks,
you have
man.
a great day.
You too.
Appreciate it, Coach.
See ya.